Yes, as you can see, today is the guide to your fantasy football success. Whether you've been when if you're new to fantasy football, if you've been playing for a long time but you've never really felt prepared, most people will wait till the last minute to figure out what they need and on draft day, which is why they end up drafting behind. And what I mean by behind is that you don't understand what is actually being presented in front of you. Welcome to the Front Office Podcast. I am your host, Pistols. Tonight is episode 4, and we break down what you actually need to understand before you draft. Fantasy football is not a guessing game. It doesn't have to be a guessing game. If you prepare accordingly, and as the season approaches and as your draft day approaches, the things that you need to know before you draft. Starting off today with today's draft lesson of the day. The draft lesson today that I prepared for you guys is know your scoring settings. Every league is different. Every league has different scoring rules, and the things that you need to know before draft day are very important. The way that your league is scored, the way that points are scored in your league, is one of the most important things that you could figure out before you draft. Whether it be a standard league, a half PPR, a full PPR, which is points per reception, will definitely change the way that you draft. If it is a full PPR, we're talking guys who get 5, 6, 7 catches and per game, and that's a full 5, 6, 7 points right off the bat. Those are free points based on the receptions and the role that a guy has. And if you know what your settings are, that will change the player value almost immediately. The minute that you figure out, if it's a half PPR or a full PPR, it kind of allows you to, prepare in a way that it helps you prepare in a way that you can kind of construct a roster accordingly. Your scoring settings determine the value of players. So if you don't understand the scoring, you just draft from behind. And you're drafting blind, essentially. A full point per reception, like I said, that's free points to guys that receive a incredible volume of plays that go their way, whether it be a running back out of the backfield or a wide receiver who is just dominant on the field. In full PPRs, you kind of value running backs who have a backfield presence, who have a tendency to be able to catch the ball out of the backfield, whether it's on a screen pass or a broken play that happens if the quarterback is scrambling because the defender broke through the line and needs to improvise on a play. A lot of those plays go to the running backs, and if you have a guy that comes out of the backfield and can be that guy for you, in a full PPR league, those are big points that changes the value of a running back heavily. Half PPR leagues, you look for very high volume guys that get 15 targets a game. Right off the bat, we're looking at a guy like Puka Nacua from the LA Rams. He's a very high volume guy. He's on the field 90+% of the time, and of that percentage, he's a guy that's just getting the ball thrown his way. So even in a half PPR, if he gets 10 catches a game, that's 5 points. In a full PPR, that's 10 free points. So knowing those scoring values will help you determine the value of players that are available on draft day. If you don't understand that, then you're just then you're just falling behind. I like to look at fantasy football as it's a passion of mine, and I constantly prepare, and I want to help you guys prepare as well. What actually wins leagues is opportunity. Fantasy football is about opportunity. It's not a highlight reel. It's not popularity contest. It's not your favorite team. It's the opportunity that's presented week in and week out of every single week in the NFL. Volume, stable roles, coaching consistency, and red zone usage are the biggest things that contribute to that. If a guy has massive volume, and what I mean by volume is in the double digits of targets, 25 plus rushes per for a running back, and what does he make out of those opportunities? A guy that is just running down the field, open, but doesn't receive the ball, it doesn't matter because he's not getting you points, and points are what matter, and points are what win, week in and week out. So a guy who has a ton of volume, for example, a guy like Jonathan Taylor, who's getting 25 plus touches per game, he's going to make the most of it. A guy like Derrick Henry, who's getting 25 plus touches a game, a guy who has that much volume is going to, put the yards up that you need to succeed week in and week out. Guys like that, and what we do here is we evaluate the situation. So if you can look into a situation on every team and figure out who is going to get the majority of the work, draft day becomes a lot easier. And if you can figure that out, and drafts don't go perfectly, they never do. You're not panicking when you make your picks. You're evaluating each situation, and you're going, and basically you're just kind of going from there. And guys who are in stable roles, like your Jamar Chases, your Jonathan Taylors, as I mentioned, Nico Collins, who can be very consistent every single week. That those guys are going to get the targets that are needed to help you win each week. Coaching consistency is big time when it comes to fantasy football. Teams that constantly are revolving their head coaching position and their coordinators are typically teams that you see are still trying to find an identity, whether they have superstars on their roster or not. It's not about being a superstar. It's about the role that they play and the volume that they get each week. And the other biggest point that I want to make is red zone usage. Where are the points coming from? Somebody has to score at some point. If you're a team like the Eagles, your red zone usage is Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley. So those guys hold higher value than the wide receivers on the team, because their red zone usage, they're the guys that are getting the ball within the 20-yard line. A team like Arizona Cardinals, for instance, who had a tight end who was very heavily used in the red zone, and Trey McBride, he had 11 touchdowns this year. Double-digit touchdowns is incredible volume, especially at the tight end position. We saw Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams from the Rams have that red zone volume this year, and these guys just are where they need to be every play. And then that makes it easy for a quarterback like Matt Stafford and various quarterbacks in the league. Just makes it easy for them to trust their guys in the red zone, and that's where the points come from. Volume wins. It really does. Regardless if a guy like Derrick Henry is getting the ball 30 times a game, it might take him 25 rushes to reach 100 yards, but 100 yards is 10 points. 100 yards is 10 points for a running back, and when you add the red zone usage for Derrick Henry and guys like that, and Saquon Barkley and Jalen Hurts and Devontae Adams, who are constantly getting open within that 20-yard line, you're going to score a lot of points. And those are the guys that you look for. Smart managers are going to draft the opportunity. They're not just going to look at the stats from last year and go, okay, well, this guy's a big name. He's a great talent, but in the case of Justin Jefferson, who a lot of people drafted in the first round, were very, very disappointed this year because their quarterback situation is abysmal. They don't know what they're doing at quarterback. They have JJ McCarthy, who's a guy that came in. This is year 2 for him, and going into year 3 by the time the season starts, and a guy like that who this the stability there is not ideal for fantasy football. And what we like to figure out in the off season is where they're being used, the volume that a player is having, are they stable in their role, and is it just is it is it a formula to win week in and week out in fantasy football? Um, Now, like I said, it's early in the season. We're in February, and by the time this episode airs, it's probably going to be March. Um, I'm not telling you who to draft. Okay, that is not what this channel is about. Um, the biggest thing for me is I want to help you guys, and I want to teach you guys how to think when you draft. Okay, um, knowing how to evaluate and evaluate situations and systems and schemes and all that, it will help you on draft day. Okay. You don't need someone sitting here telling you, oh, this guy ranks here, this guy ranks there, and rankings were going to change, especially throughout the season as guys become more comfortable in their roles, and as the league plays on year after year, week after week. It just You get guys that are gonna, somebody might be ranked number 1 at the, before draft day even gets here, and before week 1 of the regular season, and then by week 5 they're out of the top 10, and it's a guy that you drafted in the first round, and now you're just incredibly disappointed. You can't be disappointed in a guy uh, who gets the volume that it takes to produce points every week in a fantasy football matchup. You go against a guy in the league who, drafted high ranking players. Um, just because you draft Puka Nakua or Josh Allen or guys that put up big, big numbers, if you don't fill it in with guys that are going to produce points for you, it doesn't matter if Josh Allen or Jamar Chase, put up 30, 40 points every week if the rest of your team doesn't perform well. And that just comes with doing the research and you know making sure that you are looking at all aspects of a situation. You know, as I said, it's one of those things that it comes with time. And the time to put in is during the off season when coaching changes are happening after the Super Bowl happens, and coaches get fired, and teams gain new head coaches and new offensive coordinators and defensive coordinators, and figuring out all the things that go into um, basically you're basically starting over when you bring in a new head coach and a new offensive coordinator, and playbooks change and roles change and depth charts change, and all that. All those things go into um, all those things go into having a successful fantasy football season. Uh, so it's just little things to look out for when making your picks on draft day. Now, the biggest mistakes people make during their drafts and during fantasy football, mistake number one is drafting the name instead of the role. Okay, draft the role, not the reputation. We know Justin Jefferson is elite talent. Okay, but Justin Jefferson's situation at quarterback really makes him a fantasy risk. And I said that in the last episode, in one of my early red flags for the season. just evaluating what's going on around him and evaluating what happened last season. Now he was probably a first round pick that a lot of people were disappointed in because he finished outside the top 15 or top 10, top 15 of fantasy producers this year. So just because he's a big name, it does not mean that it doesn't mean big points are on the way, as we saw with Justin Jefferson, because he only had 2 touchdowns last season. 2 touchdowns for Justin Jefferson, who is an elite talent, an elite wide receiver in the league. It just couldn't translate, his play on the field to points for fantasy football. And now, don't get me wrong, it is fantasy football. It's called fantasy football for a reason. I understand that, but we all sit here and we all play it. But guys like that, that's a perfect example of drafting the name instead of the role and instead of the role and the stability that helps you win week in and week out. Number 2, as I mentioned before, ignoring your scoring settings, because the scoring changes everything. Whether you're a standard league, whether you're a half PPR or full PPR, those minor details mean everything when it comes to drafting. Full PPR, you're gonna want guys who, have a stable role in their respective offenses that are gonna help you put up points. And every catch is a point. In a full PPR and a half PPR, you're obviously getting half of a point per catch. But if it's a guy who produces a lot of yards, and then you're still okay there, and that really makes running backs a little bit more valuable. So keeping in mind the scoring settings of the leagues that you're joining and the leagues that you're in, that'll help you come draft day, so you're not panicking when it comes to making your picks. Mistake number 3 is drafting your favorite team. I know a lot of people, especially Buffalo Bills fans. I'm originally from Buffalo, New York. I'm a massive Bills fan. I'm sure you're going to hear it on the channel plenty. You're probably going to get annoyed with it, and that's fine. Bills fans love drafting Josh Allen very early in drafts. But drafting your favorite team, fantasy football is not loyalty football. It's not. Don't draft your favorite team because you just want a guy from your favorite team on your roster. Sometimes, in certain instances, that's not going to be the best strategy for you in terms of points, accumulating points every week. You want guys on teams that have, a lot of volume and a lot of targets, and the best thing in fantasy football players, we love teams that play from behind every week. Sometimes the worst teams in the league produce some of the best fantasy players. We saw it this year with Wan'Dale Robinson in New York, up with the Giants. They were not a team that was winning many games. They started hot. Ultimately, they let Brian Daboll go in the middle of the season. They found something in Jackson Dart, had some issues with injuries. They lost Malik Neighbors very, very early in the season, so a lot of people who drafted him, and I know injuries are random and you can't predict them and you don't know who's going to get hurt. But for the most part, drafting your favorite team is not going to help you win games. Just because you like the Tennessee Titans doesn't mean you should draft every wide receiver or running back or quarterback from their team. They had a very, very lackluster season despite drafting Cam Ward number 1 overall, and it was just a bad day for Titans, a bad year for Titans fans. That is not something that will help you win in the long run. Mistake number 4 is chasing last year's points. Looking at guys who maybe finished in the top 5. As I said, just because you finish in the top 5 evaluating the situation and what is going on around them will help you draft for the upcoming year. As I said, people who drafted Justin Jefferson, they didn't really look at, oh, well, they have J.J. McCarthy at quarterback. They're going to be fine. He's still going to get his targets. He's still going to get his points. Especially for drafting him in the first round, you didn't see those points. You saw a decline and you were probably frustrated and you probably missed the playoffs because you relied on a guy from last season that, didn't really make the most of his opportunities because he didn't have the opportunities given to him because of the situation around him. Evaluating that and looking deeper into that, you were probably left disappointed. Another guy that comes off, the top of my head is Ashton Genty, very highly anticipated running back out of Boise State. Put up a ton of yards while in college. Didn't really translate well into the NFL. He was put in a tough situation, and you have a guy like Brock Bowers who also got hurt, who people drafted high, and were just left disappointed and shaking their heads. And why did I draft this guy? Well, looking at the situation around them, the Raiders didn't really have that great of an offensive line. Ashton Genty only had a few games that were really, noteworthy. He didn't finish in the top 15 in fantasy points, I don't think. I'd have to look that up, and you can put those in the comments below if you know the exact stats that he had. But that's a guy that you drafted probably pretty high because he was a starting running back, and coming into the league, he was one of the highest rated prospects coming out of college, and you just didn't really understand. But and obviously we didn't have last year's points to go off of to draft him, but the whole point is you didn't evaluate the situation around him to understand what he was going to do in the Raiders offense. But like I said, a guy like Saquon Barkley, you looked at a 2,000-yard rushing season, and he disappointed a lot of fantasy managers. Drafting him in the first round, he put up third and fourth round numbers. Finished outside the top 10, probably for the first time since he's been healthy. And, it's just one of those things where, I understand the randomness of the NFL, and I understand that you can't predict injuries and you can't really, but you can project. If you can project on a situation and understand going into it, what situation is around them, it makes draft day a lot easier. So don't chase last year's points. And the last mistake that people make is ignoring your bench depth. Okay, ignoring the bench depth is a key component in a lot of failure in fantasy football. Your bench wins leagues. And it all ties back into, like I was talking about before, injuries happen. You can't predict them. So if you have bench guys that can come in and put up points for you in the event of any injury, then you're doing okay in your fantasy league. So the biggest mistakes: drafting names instead of roles, ignoring scoring settings, drafting your favorite team, chasing last year's points, and ignoring bench depth. And those things are, in my opinion, key in fantasy football, and evaluating who to draft and who not to draft every single year. And these are the things that I look at. Like I said, feel free to leave your comments below. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have, or feel free to give me your opinions and what you guys look for come draft day. Next thing I want to go over is how to evaluate players. I mentioned some of these things prior to this segment here. How to evaluate players. I ask myself 4 questions every year. What's their role? What's their projected volume? Is their situation stable? And what round are they being drafted in? And that fourth question comes, where are people drafting them in other drafts? There are many websites out there that you can mock draft in to kind of get an idea of where players are being drafted. The ADP polls that come out from the experts and the analysts that kind of tell where a guy should be drafted. ADP, if you don't know, stands for average draft position. And what that means is just where are they being taken in drafts for the year. So yeah, those four questions are key. Those are the things that I look for when I look to make my picks every draft day. What is their role? What role do they play? Are they the outside receiver? Are they the X receiver in the slot? Do they play tight end? What kind of running back are they? What's their role in the offense? What role do they play for their team? Are they a high volume guy? Are they a low volume guy? Are they 10 to 15 touches out of the backfield? Are they 20 to 25 touches out of the backfield? All these things go into into draft day and evaluating the value of players. Number two is, like I said, their projected volume. Is it a guy that is going to get 10 to 15 targets, or is he a guy that's going to get 5 to 10 targets? Obviously, you want the guy with the higher target share, the higher rush percentage. Speaking of percentage, what percentage of snaps they're taking on the field? All these things go into preparing yourself to take a guy come draft day. Is their situation stable? And I keep using Justin Jefferson as the prime example here because he is a guy that was drafted very high, probably in the first round. What's the situation around him? Their quarterback situation is not stable. That probably leads to a situation that is a high risk. And drafting a guy based on that is probably not the answer. And I know a lot of fantasy managers were very disappointed in Justin Jefferson's production this year because he was taken so high, and you expect a high output of production from a guy like that. And then, like I said, what round are they being drafted in? And that just comes with the ADP polls that come out, and they the experts and analysts and I'm not claiming to be any type of expert. These are just tips and tricks that I use for myself. I've won plenty of fantasy leagues, but don't get me wrong, I have lost my fair share of fantasy leagues as well. And that's just what comes down to is these four questions every single year I ask myself when it comes to drafting a guy. When I look at who's available and who's out there, and who changed teams and who's still on the team, and all these things. So these four questions help me kind of round out how I want my roster to be built. Leading into my fantasy reality check of the week. The fantasy reality check. Like I said, drafting your favorite player is not a strategy. Preparation is a strategy. Preparation eliminates the panic. When you panic during a draft, things really are not going to go your way. And if you can eliminate the panic from draft day, everything will run so much smoother. The last thing that I want to go over is roster construction. This is another thing that I like to prepare myself for when it comes to draft day. Roster construction. How do I want to build my roster? I am a guy, and I know that everybody drafts differently. everybody has a different opinion, and I'd love to hear your guys' opinions. Drop comments down below. But when it comes to roster construction, I will always draft with my first pick in the first round will be a running back. I love to have a running back. I believe that running backs hold the highest value uh, next to the quarterback. Of course, quarterbacks put up massive points, but running backs and wide receivers are if you can get those guys with the high volume and the high the ones that are in the most stable situations, those are the guys that are going to help you win your leagues. My first pick is always a running back. It doesn't matter where I draft. It is a running back. Whether I draft it first overall, whether I draft at 10 or 12, depending on how many guys are in your league, it is a running back in the first round. Running backs hold the highest value in my opinion, and you might disagree with that, and that's fine, and that's what we're here for. I'd love to hear your guys' opinions on the running back position and to see where you guys stand on a running back. But my first pick is always a running back, usually a guy who has high volume output, a guy that's going to get 20 25 plus touches per game, a guy that is going to catch a lot of balls out of the backfield, a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs or Bijan Robinson or Jonathan Taylor, who had a massive season, and that's one of the biggest things that I look for. My next pick is usually another running back or a wide receiver, and that is just contingent on where I draft in my league. If I am one of the picks in the first 4 picks, I will pick a running back, and then I will come back in the second round and pick a wide receiver. If I pick late in the first round, like 10 or 12, depending on where I'm at, I will take running back, and then I will go wide receiver in the third round and wide receiver in the fourth round. My first 4 picks are some combination of running back, wide receiver, wide receiver. That is just, that is my personal preference. I will not take a quarterback, or I will not take a tight end. As I said in a previous episode of the podcast, tight end is becoming an irrelevant position in fantasy football, and drafting a tight end early just leaves me with one less draft pick to where I can take a skill position guy like a wide receiver or running back. My first pick will always be a running back. My second pick will just depends on where I draft. Will either be a running back or a wide receiver. And again, in the third and fourth rounds, I'll round those out with running back, wide receiver, and some combination, depending on how the draft goes and my team needs. Again, that goes back to knowing the format of my league, whether I start 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 3 wide receivers, and throwing a flex there somewhere to where you can either pick a wide receiver, running back, or tight end. I typically will not pick a tight end in the first 6 rounds. Just more opportunity for those guys that are going to produce more points. Quarterbacks, I'm very happy with a guy like Dak Prescott or Matt Stafford even this past year in the later rounds, like 10, 11, 12. I was very happy with the output. Obviously, we had Matt Stafford win MVP. If you drafted him, late in your draft, you were very, very happy with his output. 48 touchdowns to like 10 interceptions or so. Ultimately leading to his MVP. But a guy like Dak Prescott, who is up and down every once in a while, obviously he has a pretty stable role in the Dallas Cowboys offense. He's their guy. He is their $60 million guy. They're never going to, stray away from that, from that guy. And those are the things that I look for when it comes to roster construction. I'm never picking a kicker in the ninth round. Uh, I'm never picking a kicker until the last pick that I have. Kickers don't really matter. Yes, they produce points, but any of those guys out there can produce those points. We saw a very, very diverse kicking group that a different guy led the league each week. Yes, we saw Cam Little from Jacksonville kick a 69 or 68 yarder. That doesn't happen every single week. So it's just one of those things where that is not a pick that I'm going to make before the last round of the draft because it just takes away from one of those skill positions that I look to round out my roster and stack my bench to got in case guys get hurt. Who know, maybe those guys in the later rounds can step up and really make some magic happen. Um, so those things are the things that I go through. Kind of a little insight into the way my brain thinks about um, fantasy football and where to draft and how I draft um, like I said, everybody's entitled to their opinion, and I would appreciate your guys' comments, concerns. You know, what do you guys think, and how do you guys draft? I'm curious to see how everybody else's brain works come draft time, and let me know what you guys think down in the comments. I appreciate you guys for watching. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for being here. This is the Front Office Podcast. We prepare now, we win later, and that's what we do around here. I am your host, Pistols. Follow me on Twitch live every Sunday and Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Those are the 2 days that I go live, and we do typically record the Front Office Podcast episodes the first hour before we get into some gaming and whatnot. But yeah, I appreciate you guys for being here again. This is the Front Office Podcast. I am your host, Pistols. Follow me on all social media at Pistols Live HQ. That's YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. And I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks for joining me.